Reverend Markel Hutchins is the leader of Movement Forward Incorporated, a modern collaborative for human and civil rights. He is an ordained minister and one of the nation's leading advocates for social justice, civil rights, and humanitarian causes. Movement Forward's OneCOP initiative brings a revolutionary approach to bridging the gap between police departments and the communities they serve. Here to tell us more about OneCOP is Reverend Markel Hutchins.
How are you, sir?
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Reverend Hutchins, thank you for joining us. And just really quick, Reverend Hutchins, tell us about your role as a young civil rights leader and activist in response to perceptions of police misconduct and bias.
Well, growing up in Atlanta, I had a very unique experience. There was no one else in my family that was in the ministry, no one in politics, no one in civil rights advocacy, but this has just been my life's work and my life's calling, and somehow I came into relationship and have been fortunate enough to be mentored by a lot of the civil rights icons that work very closely with Martin Luther King Jr., including his wife, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Congressman John Lewis, Andrew Young, Hosea Williams, Joseph Lowery, just the people that worked alongside of Dr. King. And what I began to see is that after that generation of leadership that really was focused on bringing all Americans together to deal with issues around civil and human rights, they were not focused on just African-American causes, but the cause of humanity. Dr. King's mantra was redeeming the soul of America. But after that generation, it just didn't seem that there were any of us in younger generations that were stepping up to continue that work of collaborative outreach. And so I became what I think you could reasonably describe as an outspoken activist and leader on police misconduct and bias and those kinds of issues in my teenage and college years. And I've gone on to do a lot of advocacy around the country, and I'm a frequent guest on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and other media outlets. But I've really been, this is really just who I am in my life's work.
So in addition to those experiences, we know that about 3 years ago, you had a very interesting experience yourself. How did that experience change your approach? I
was approached by one of the largest, in fact, the largest news television station in the South, WSB-TV, based in Atlanta. And what they asked is, in my capacity as an outspoken and visible civil rights leader, if I would be willing to put myself in the role of a police officer to get a glimpse of life behind the badge after having done so much advocacy around police misconduct, or what I would have called at that time police misconduct cases. They wanted to expose me to the realities of policing. So they asked me to engage in a 2-day training seminar, basically, again, to put me in the shoes of a police officer and give me a glimpse of life behind the badge. And I did that, and quite frankly, it was not only eye-opening, but it was really transformative. And without that experience, I don't know that I'd be sitting on this stage talking to you today.
And we have a video of that, so let's take a look at it, and you can tell us a little bit about your experience.
Oh, sure.
These officers from APD's elite Apex unit will likely hit the street with citizens that do not view the police like they did a year ago. Now, we could not give the activists in our story, obviously, all the shoot or don't shoot training that they have had. But would his experience change him? And if so, how? Dude, he was not coming at you.
Well, my perception was that he was.
Drop your weapon! Would not want to be the officer going before the grand jury on that.
An active day.
I saw him draw his weapon.
Squeeze the trigger.
For civil rights activist Markel Hutchins. Quickly immersed in shooting policy.
Who here holds their cell phone like this?
And handgun handling.
The only time you put your finger on the trigger is when you're ready to kill or destroy something.
At the Atlanta Police Academy. Immersed.
Drop your weapon!
In the world of the split second of life.
Let me see your hands.
Or death.
11 shots fired, 3 hits, none of them were lethal shots.
Justifiable.
And we cannot shoot an unarmed, non-dangerous fleeing suspect.
Go on, son!
On the first couple video scenarios, the expert ruled the Reverend shoots.
Were you justified in using lethal force then?
Yes.
Righteous.
Why? Who were you protecting?
Myself.
Exactly.
But in a third.
Ma'am, drop your weapon!
There was a whole lot going on there very quickly. I mean, and that's what we as police officers have to deal with.
He shot an off-duty policewoman. Repeatedly.
And you're visibly emotional, aren't you?
Sure.
Are you really sure
who you were trying to shoot?
No. No. At best, I made a somewhere between a head and a heart decision and a judgment.
Then, with head and heart protected, time to ratchet up.
All right, turn around.
The realism.
Ceasefire, 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 ceasefire.
I saw him draw his weapon.
Okay. But you pointed your weapon at those two as well, didn't you?
Yes.
Why?
Because I saw them lift something.
Real people.
Drop your weapon!
With a real can, hammer, and gun. This time, good job on the first 3 situations, but on the 4th.
Drop your weapon!
Wow, dynamics just changed. You just shot a guy with a hammer that is 16 feet away from you. Where's the hammer?
In his hand.
Port arms, right?
Yes.
Do you feel that would have been justified?
It's questionable.
Questionable? You'd have probably been prosecuted on that one.
You know, that transformed my perspective in a lot of ways, Mr. Moore. In so many ways, we can't change communities unless we are willing to change our perspectives, change our mindsets, change our hearts, change our tactics and our strategy. So I have gone from being someone that thought that progress along police-community relations lines could be better impacted by protesting, and now I believe that change can only happen by collaboration. We have to figure out a way to cause communities and law enforcement to work closer together, because there's so much that the community does not recognize about the realities, the dangers of policing. And I think one of the things that is, as one who is very much committed to human and civil rights, one of the things that I think I've had to explain more to some of my mentors than anything else is I've not changed my view. I still get upset when there's a law enforcement involved tragedy where somebody's rights may have been violated. The difference is I now believe that our pathway to progress is collaborative and not divisive. So in many, many ways, I think my perspective as well as my tactics and leadership that I try to offer the nation have been transformed by this singular exercise.
That in and of itself is a tremendous takeaway. But tell us, what else did you see differently as a result of your experiences? How did it change your approach to your work?
Well, the first thing is, having gone through that experience, I saw that many times what we think we're seeing is not actually what we're seeing. So in a lot of instances, some of these Facebook and Twitter and Instagram videos and posts and things that the American people are seeing, we, those of us who are not in law enforcement, those of us who are neophytes, think we're seeing one thing. We think we're legitimately looking at a social injustice, when in fact, in some instances, it is exactly that. But in some instances, it's not that at all. But here's where we all agree. We all agree that crime and violence is detrimental to a community's well-being. We all agree that we've got to find a way to reduce crime and violence in every community and every neighborhood across this country. And I think we have to wrestle with the realities that those who we charge with protecting and serving our communities are wrestling with some of these issues. They're dealing with occupational stressors that many of us will never understand. So when we expect police officers to make sound judgments, to make what I talked about, these head and heart decisions, we have to support them. We have to collaborate them and help them to understand that their local neighborhood supports them. But that support can only come when there's a degree of understanding, both the officers understanding the people they're policing, and the people that they're policing understand those officers. We're at a real critical point, I think, in American history with regard to police community engagement. We are what Dr. King might say is a choice between chaos and community. We must engage the community in community policing. For the last several decades, I think most of the law enforcement entities around the country, particularly in major cities, but smaller communities as well, have engaged in community policing. But largely that has been the law enforcement community reaching for the community at large. But I think the times in which we live require that the community reaches for law enforcement and says, we don't know all that there is to know about you, but we're willing to learn. We're willing to support you, but it's only through that support that we're able to hold officers to a standard that I think every community should expect from their law enforcement professionals. And so I think, you know, we talked earlier, we must improve and strengthen relationships between communities and their police officers at every level before a situation explodes. One of the real challenges and lessons that I think we learned from Ferguson is that we can't respond by trying to build relationships on the backside between police and communities. We've got to have those relationships proactively and not always be reactive. I often say that a little light displaces a whole lot of darkness. And I think what these faith communities are in a position to do is bring a little light to some of the darkness that we've seen with regard to police-community relations over the last several years.
Tell us about that. How does the OneCOP initiative bring that light? What is it? How does it work?
So the OneCOP initiative, and the acronym stands for One Congregation-One Precinct, is a faith-based initiative. It's not religious. There's nothing inherently religious about what it is we do, but we recognize that these faith communities are largely an untapped resource for law enforcement, both on the police-community relations side as well as the crime and violence reduction side of things. Every community, every neighborhood, every corner in many instances has a church, a synagogue, or mosque. In most cases, those have dozens and sometimes hundreds and thousands of people that are likely ambassadors for improving the relationship and collaboration between the citizens in that neighborhood and the law enforcement professionals that police those streets every day. So in 2016, when all of the tensions were really festering in America around police community engagement in the aftermath of the Ferguson case, we really started to contemplate what institutions could bring people together to address and deal with some of these issues, and the faith-based community started to emerge as the most likely vehicle because, again, they have influence, they have a bully pulpit, they have resources that really should be intertwined with those of law enforcement. So what we do is we partner the congregations together with the officers that police in and around the community where that house of worship exists. So those congregations partner with the officers, and together those partner officers and those local congregations, not just the heads of those entities, but the local officers and the local community members work together on issues and activities and things that are specifically responsive to the needs of that local community with the goal of several things. One, improving public safety, reducing crime and violence, getting the community engaged, helping them to understand what the trends are in that local neighborhood, where crimes are happening, and what kind of outreach the community can do to help reduce crime. Secondly, increase community engagement with the patrol level officers. In most instances, I found that the chief of police or the sheriff or the head of the agency will have a relationship with the pastor or the rabbi, but that has not heretofore translated into the beat and patrol officers having relationships with the community and utilizing the house of worship to do so. The OneCOP initiative provides a vehicle, a structure, and uniformity to how these law enforcement agencies can get the most out of their relationships with the houses of worship that many of them already work with. So thirdly, avert public responses that are divisive to police-involved controversies. We've got to figure out a way to be responsive to the needs of community, to be responsive to law enforcement, but to do so in a way that is not divisive and doesn't divide people from law enforcement and law enforcement from the people that they're policing. And so those are kind of the goals of the OneCOP initiative, and that is what our interests are. And we're having a lot of success in doing so.
So just really quickly, can you tell us, if I'm a community leader,
Sure.
if I am a member of the clergy, a law enforcement supervisor, precinct commander, police chief, how do I get started? How does OneCOP work?
We start with a face-to-face meeting Typically, we'll have a law enforcement entity, and there are literally dozens of them across the country who continue to reach out to us and ask us to bring the OneCOP community to their local, the OneCOP initiative to their local community. But frankly, there's more interest than resources. So we've got to try to prioritize and figure out, and that's the job that my team has of trying to make sure that we are prioritizing the communities that perhaps need the work the most. But we start with a face-to-face meeting where I'll sit down myself with the chief and the sheriff, the U.S. attorney, the FBI, the district attorney, all of them collaboratively, and we'll explain to them how the OneCOP initiative works, how it's structured, what the outcomes are. Then we will jointly send a letter of invitation to every house of worship, every church, every synagogue, every mosque, African American, Hispanic, white, Asian, black, everybody working together, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, everybody working together, and we'll have this big kickoff event. Oftentimes we'll train faith leaders and put them through some of the same exercises that I went through the day before the big kickoff, and we always have hundreds and hundreds of faith leaders that come to sit down and meet and engage with their law enforcement professionals. For example, we recently launched in the city of Indianapolis, Indiana, which has seen some issues around crime in the last several years, as crime has increased, I should say. And what we found is that we expected to have 30 or 40 houses of worship that signed on. Instead, we had 205 in the city of Indianapolis alone. There's a lot of interest in the faith community for engaging with law enforcement. The question is, how do we move this movement around the country?
And you know, it's interesting because we've seen that interest, right? You started 3 years ago. You're in a number of cities. Tell us how many are signed on.
One of the things that I'm most proud of is that within a short time frame, we've been able to collaborate with nearly every major law enforcement entity in America, from the Department of Justice to the COPS Office and the Office of Law Enforcement Affairs and the DOJ, to every one of the national police associations, the Fraternal Order of Police, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Sheriff's Association, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and again, nearly every major one of the national police associations have signed on to partner and collaborate with us on the OneCOP initiative, and we expect those partnerships to continue to grow.
Great. Impressive list of partners. Now, just tell us what you would like our viewers to do now that they have heard a little bit more about OneCOP. What's the takeaway for them?
Well, one, we would love to hear what people think about the OneCOP initiative, what their perspectives are on the work that we're doing. Obviously, they can visit us on social media, visit our website at www.onecop.net. But we're all focused on decreasing bias, increasing familiarity, and building mutual trust and respect between the law enforcement professionals and the people that they're policing. And in all of those instances, those things cut both ways. We are not reduced, Mr. Moore, to the divisions of the past. We have hope for the future, and I often say we are not nearly as divided as we are disconnected. We've got to know and help communities to understand that policing is hard. It is difficult. We need to support them, not just for their sake, but we need to support them for our sake as well, because again, only when the police officers are healthy and supported and mentally well are they able to make the best judgments that they can to protect themselves and the people that they're sworn to protect and serve.
We have time for one closing thought. What is the most important thing that you want everyone to remember about the OneCOP initiative?
What I want everybody to remember is that we are really not as divided as we are disconnected. In these times and in these moments where so much of the news, both traditional media as well as social media, is focused on what our differences are, we've got to figure out how to turn to each other and not turn on each other. I want law enforcement agencies to reach out to us to bring this OneCOP, not just a program, but this OneCOP design, this model into your community. We're having a lot of success. I'd love to see other entities within our government embrace this idea that if we turn to each other and not on each other, there's no limit to the good that can be done.
And you can all visit the OneCOP website or call for more information. Reverend Hutchins, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.